The Galactic Council's chamber was tense. Beings of every shape and size sat in their designated seats, their eyes focused on the massive holographic display at the center of the room. Floating in the void was a blue-green planet, its single moon casting a faint glow. Earth, Counselor Vrax muttered, his scaled fingers tapping the table. Are we truly considering allowing them into the Alliance? A murmur of unease rippled through the room. The Council, which governed over 100 species, had faced many challenges, but none as unpredictable as this. They are dangerous, hissed Counselor Erix, a thin, insectoid being whose antennae twitched with irritation. Their history is filled with war, destruction, and chaos. If we let them in, we may be inviting disaster. Yet we cannot ignore their strengths, said Counselor Rila, a tall, avian-like diplomat. Despite their violent past, they have survived against impossible odds. They are resilient, resourceful, and innovative. We need them. The debate had gone on for hours. Some feared humanity, while others saw their potential. But what no one knew was that even as they argued, a human fleet was already on its way, crossing into contested space, unknowingly stepping into a deadly trap. Captain Elias Carter stood on the bridge of his warship, watching the swirling expanse of space beyond the viewport. The Resolute and its fleet had been ordered to make contact with the Council. Their mission was simple: prove that humanity was ready to join the Alliance. Status report, Carter said. All systems green, sir, replied Lieutenant Harris. We should reach the designated rendezvous in 6 hours. Carter nodded, but a sense of unease settled in his gut. Something about this mission didn't feel right. Humanity had fought hard to reach the stars, but they were still seen as outsiders. Many species viewed them as a threat rather than potential allies. Commander Hayes, Carter said, turning to his second-in-command. What are the odds that we get a warm welcome? Hayes smirked. Given our reputation, not great. Before Carter could respond, a sharp alarm blared through the bridge. Red warning lights flashed across the screens. Captain, we have multiple unknown vessels approaching at high speed, Harris called out. Carter's stomach tightened. Identify them. A moment later, the display lit up with the insignia of a well-known faction, the Saltrax Dominion, one of the most aggressive species in the galaxy. They're powering up weapons, Harris shouted. The Resolute shook as the first barrage of energy blasts slammed into its shields. The fleet had walked straight into an ambush. Back in the Council chambers, an emergency alert interrupted the ongoing debate. A holographic transmission flickered to life, showing the human fleet under fire. Explosions bloomed in the void, warships twisting to evade the incoming assault. Counselor Vrax's eyes widened. What is the meaning of this? A council officer hurriedly checked the data. The Saltrax Dominion is attacking the human fleet, unprovoked. Counselor Rilla turned sharply toward Erix. You knew about this, didn't you? Erix's mandibles clicked together. I may have warned certain parties about the humans' arrival. It was a precaution. If they cannot handle a simple test, they do not belong in this alliance. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some counselors demanded immediate intervention, while others remained silent, waiting to see the outcome. But one thing was clear: humanity's trial had begun, and the galaxy was watching. The ship rocked violently as another blast struck its shields. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles, and the crew struggled to maintain control. Return fire, Carter ordered. The human fleet retaliated. Plasma cannons roared, missiles streaked through space, and in seconds, the battle turned into a deadly storm of fire and debris. But the Saltrax had superior numbers. The humans were outgunned and outmatched. Sir, shields are at 40%, Harris called out. We can't take much more. Carter's mind raced. If they retreated, the Council would see them as weak. But if they stayed, they risked total annihilation. Then an idea struck him. Prepare for emergency jump, right into the enemy formation. Hayes blinked. That's suicide. Not if we take them by surprise. The crew hesitated, then obeyed. The Resolute's engines flared as it shot forward, straight toward the heart of the Saltrax fleet. The enemy, expecting the humans to flee, were caught off guard. The sudden movement disrupted their formation, and in that brief moment of confusion, the human fleet struck with everything they had. Explosions tore through Saltrax ships. The once organized assault fell into chaos. Now full retreat, Carter ordered. With the enemy reeling, the human fleet jumped away, vanishing into the void. The room was silent as the battle ended. The Saltrax, despite their numerical advantage, had been humiliated. The humans had escaped, proving their strength, their cunning, and their refusal to be broken. Counselor Vrax let out a slow breath. They survived. Rila nodded. More than that, they won. Erix, seething with anger, remained silent. The choice was clear. Humanity was not to be underestimated. But what no one realized was that the Saltrax would not forget this defeat, and the real danger was still to come. The Resolute and its fleet drifted through deep space, their hulls still scorched from the battle. The crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage, but Captain Elias Carter knew they had only bought themselves time. The Saltrax Dominion would not let this humiliation stand. In the war room, Carter stood over a holographic map of the region. The human fleet was regrouping near a nebula, using its ionized gases to mask their energy signatures. But it was only a temporary refuge. Commander Hayes crossed his arms. "We can't run forever, Captain. Sooner or later, the Saltrax will find us again." Carter exhaled sharply. "I know. That's why we need to make a move before they do." Lieutenant Harris, who had been scanning communications, suddenly turned from his console. "Sir, I intercepted a transmission from the Saltrax fleet. They've declared total war against humanity. They're rallying reinforcements, hundreds of ships." A cold silence filled the room. The Saltrax weren't just looking for revenge. They intended to wipe humanity out completely. Hayes cursed under his breath. "We need to warn Earth." Carter nodded. "Send an encrypted transmission." "But we can't just warn them. We have to buy time." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The human fleet was battered, outnumbered, and stranded deep in hostile territory. But Carter wasn't about to let the Saltrax set the pace of this war. "How many stealth drones do we have left?" he asked. Harris checked the inventory. 6 operational." Carter's mind worked fast. "Send them out. I want eyes on every Saltrax fleet movement. We need to know where their reinforcements are coming from." Minutes later, the drones launched, disappearing into the vastness of space. Days passed in tension. The crew worked in shifts, monitoring scanners, repairing damage, and preparing for whatever came next. Then finally, the first reports came in. Hayes studied the drone footage and frowned. "This doesn't make sense. The Saltrax aren't just gathering ships. They're constructing something, a massive structure in orbit over their homeworld." Carter leaned in. "Zoom in on that section." The image sharpened, revealing something horrifying. It wasn't just a warship. It was a planetary siege platform, capable of bombarding entire worlds into ruin. "They're preparing for an invasion of Earth," Carter realized. Hayes slammed his fist against the table. "If they finish that thing, we won't be able to stop them." The weight of the situation settled over the command staff. They had come to join the Galactic Council, but instead they had started a war that threatened their entire species. Carter straightened, his jaw tightening. "Then we have only one option. We don't wait for them to bring the fight to us. We take the fight to them." Hayes blinked. "You're suggesting we attack the heart of the Saltrax Dominion." Carter's eyes burned with determination. "If we strike before they're ready, we can cripple their invasion force before it even launches. It's a suicide mission if we do it wrong. But if we pull it off, we might just save Earth." The officers stared at him for a long moment. Then, one by one, they nodded. They knew what was at stake. Harris exhaled. Then we better plan this right. Because if we fail, there won't be a home to return to. And with that, the countdown to humanity's boldest gamble had begun. The human fleet moved swiftly through the void, engines running at low power to avoid detection. Every crew member aboard the Resolute knew what was at stake. The Xaltrax war machine was nearly complete, and if it launched, Earth would burn. There was no turning back now. Captain Elias Carter stood on the bridge, eyes locked on the holographic display of the Xaltrax homeworld. The massive siege platform hovered in orbit, surrounded by defensive stations and an armada of warships. It was a fortress, seemingly impenetrable. Commander Hayes studied the tactical display. A frontal assault is suicide. Their defenses will tear us apart before we even get close. Carter nodded. Then we won't go in through the front. He turned to Lieutenant Harris. What's the status of our stealth drones? Harris checked his console. We lost 2, but the others are still relaying data. There's a weakness, an old supply corridor near the planet's north pole. Lightly guarded. Carter's mind worked fast. That's our way in. We send a strike team, infiltrate the platform, and sabotage it from the inside. Hayes frowned. And the fleet. The moment we move in, they'll detect us. Carter's lips curled into a grim smile. That's why we give them something else to worry about. The plan was simple but dangerous. A small team would breach the siege platform while the rest of the human fleet launched a diversionary attack. If all went well, the Xaltrax would be too busy fighting the fleet to stop the sabotage mission. Hours later, the attack began. The human fleet emerged from the nebula like ghosts, their weapons roaring to life. Explosions blossomed across the Xaltrax formation as the first wave of missiles struck their targets. Enemy ships scrambled to respond, shifting formations to engage. Amid the chaos, a small strike craft slipped through the enemy lines, carrying Carter, Hayes, and a team of elite soldiers. The supply corridor was exactly as the drones had reported, lightly guarded, barely defended. The humans cut through the sentries before they could raise the alarm. Inside, the siege platform was a labyrinth of towering corridors and glowing machinery. The team moved quickly, planting explosives at key structural points. If the charges detonated, the entire platform would collapse. But the Xaltrax were not fools. An alarm blared, red lights flashing through the corridors. The enemy had discovered them. Within moments, squads of armored Xaltrax soldiers poured into the halls, weapons blazing. The humans returned fire, the narrow corridors turning into killing zones. Carter took cover behind a bulkhead, shouting into his comms. Harris, status on the fleet. The reply crackled through. We're holding, but they're bringing in reinforcements. We don't have much time. Hayes fired down the hall, dropping another Xaltrax soldier. Then we better move fast. The team fought their way to the final objective, the main reactor. The heart of the siege platform pulsed with unstable energy, its massive core glowing bright. Carter rushed forward, setting the last set of charges. Suddenly, the walls shook. A massive explosion rocked the structure. The diversionary attack was escalating. Carter armed the detonator. All charges set. We need to get out of here now. The team sprinted for the exit as enemy fire rained down around them. Explosions tore through the station, systems failing one by one. The Xaltrax knew what was happening, but it was too late. Back on the Resolute, Harris watched the tactical display. They did it. The platforms destabilizing. The human fleet broke off their attack, retreating at full speed as the siege platform began to collapse. One final explosion ripped through the structure, tearing it apart. The mission was a success. But Carter knew this war was far from over. The Xaltrax would not forgive this humiliation. They would come for revenge. And humanity would be ready. The aftermath of the siege platform's destruction sent ripples through the galaxy. The Xaltrax were furious, their war council demanding immediate retaliation. For the first time in their history, an enemy had struck at the heart of their military power and lived to tell the tale. Their pride had been wounded, and they would stop at nothing to make humanity pay. On board the Resolute, Captain Elias Carter stood in the war room, surrounded by holographic displays of enemy fleet movements. Intelligence reports flooded in. Zaltrak's armadas were mobilizing, their forces doubling at key strategic points. The humans had dealt them a heavy blow, but now the real war was about to begin. Commander Hayes leaned against the console, arms crossed. "We've rattled the hornet's nest, Captain. The Zaltraks are regrouping faster than we expected." Lieutenant Harris scrolled through intercepted transmissions. "They've deployed their dreadnoughts. If those monsters reach Earth, we won't be able to stop them." Carter's jaw tightened. "Then we stop them before they get the chance." He pointed at a star system highlighted in red. "This is our next move." The Solari Drift, a vast region of space filled with unstable gravitational fields and ion storms. It was a natural choke point, and the Zaltraks had to pass through it to reach human-controlled space. If the humans could set a trap there, they might have a chance to cripple the invasion before it truly began. Admiral Kovacs, leader of the human fleet, appeared on the main display. His expression was grim. "Captain Carter, your mission bought us time, but the enemy is regrouping faster than we anticipated. We need to hit them again, hard." Carter nodded. "We're already preparing a strike at Solari Drift. If we time it right, we can catch their fleet in the worst part of the storm and take them apart before they ever reach our borders." Kovacs hesitated. "It's a risky move. If your fleet gets caught in that storm, there won't be anything left to recover." Hayes smirked. "Risk is what we do best, Admiral." The plan was set. The human fleet would split into two groups. One would act as bait, drawing the Zaltraks into the drift, while the second would wait in the storm, ready to ambush them. It was a desperate gamble, but if it worked, humanity might just survive the coming war. As the ships prepared for battle, Carter stood at the bridge, staring at the swirling chaos of the Solari Drift ahead. His gut told him this was going to be the fight of their lives. The Zaltraks thought they were coming for an easy war. They had no idea what awaited them. The human fleet moved into position, hiding within the violent chaos of the Solari Drift. Ion storms crackled through space, sending unpredictable bursts of energy through the void. It was the perfect place for an ambush. But it was also a deadly gamble. One wrong move, and the humans would be lost in the storm along with their enemy. Captain Carter stood at the command deck of the Resolute, watching as the Zaltraks fleet approached. The enemy ships were moving cautiously, aware of the dangers the drift presented. They had learned from past battles not to underestimate humanity, but they still believed themselves superior. "Status report," Carter said. Lieutenant Harris kept her eyes on the scanners. "The Zaltraks fleet is entering the drift. Their capital ships are taking the lead, with smaller cruisers providing escort. They're trying to control their formation, but the storm is already affecting their ships." Commander Hayes smirked. "Good. The more unstable their fleet, the better for us." Admiral Kovacs' voice came through the comms. "Carter, this is it. We have one chance at this. If we fail, there won't be a second battle." Carter nodded. "Understood, Admiral. We'll make it count." The Zaltraks fleet was now fully inside the drift. Their shields flickered as they struggled against the storm's interference. This was the moment. "Fire at will," Carter commanded. The Resolute and its hidden fleet erupted with a barrage of firepower. Plasma bolts and railgun slugs ripped through the storm, striking the enemy ships with brutal precision. Explosions tore through the Zaltraks formation as they scrambled to respond. On board the enemy flagship, Warlord Xivan snarled as alarms blared. Ambush. The humans were waiting for us. His second-in-command, General Vralok, bared his fangs. They dare challenge us here. They trapped themselves as well. The Zaltraks fired back, but the storm's interference made their targeting systems unreliable. Their shots went wide, hitting nothing but empty space. Meanwhile, the human fleet continued its precise assault, taking full advantage of their enemies' disarray. One by one, Zaltrak's ships were torn apart. Their dreadnoughts, once symbols of their military might, became floating wrecks as human firepower overwhelmed them. But the battle was far from over. "The enemy is adapting," Harris warned. "They're adjusting their weapons to compensate for the storm." Carter clenched his fists. "Then we hit them harder. Deploy the secondary wave." A new squadron of human ships emerged from the drifting debris, launching a fresh assault on the weakened Zaltrak's forces. The enemy fleet was now caught in a crossfire, unable to advance or retreat. Panic spread through the Zaltrak's ranks. They had never faced an enemy like this, one that turned the environment into a weapon, one that refused to be crushed under their might. On the Resolute, Carter watched as the tide of battle turned. "Their command ship is vulnerable," Hayes pointed out. "If we take it out, the rest of their fleet will crumble." Carter nodded. "Target their flagship. End this now." The human fleet concentrated all firepower on the Zaltrak's command ship. Its shields flickered, then shattered under the relentless barrage. A final explosion erupted from the ship's core, signaling the end of the battle. The remaining Zaltrak's forces, leaderless and in chaos, began to retreat. They had come expecting to conquer. Instead, they had been humiliated. As the debris of the battle drifted through space, Carter exhaled. "It's over." Hayes smirked. For now. The war was far from finished, but today, humanity had proven once again that they were not to be underestimated. The battlefield was littered with the burning wreckage of Zaltrak's warships. Explosions still flickered in the distance, their dying embers floating through the storm-ridden void. The human fleet had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Captain Carter stood at the command deck of the Resolute, watching the enemy fleet retreat. His crew erupted in cheers, but he remained still, his gaze locked on the flickering remains of the Zaltrak's command ship. "Sir, enemy forces are scattering," Lieutenant Harris reported. "They're running for their lives." Carter exhaled slowly. "They're not running. They're regrouping." Commander Hayes turned from his station. "You really think they'll come back after this slaughter?" Carter nodded. "The Zaltrak's don't know how to quit. They just adapt. And when they do, they hit harder." A heavy silence settled over the bridge. The victory had been decisive, but it had also been expected. Humanity had always fought with strategy and precision, but the Zaltrak's had overwhelming numbers. A single battle wouldn't change that. Admiral Kovac's voice came through the comms. "Captain Carter, I need you to report to the War Council immediately. We have a problem." Carter exchanged a look with Hayes before nodding. "Understood, Admiral. We're on our way." Minutes later, Carter and his senior officers joined a secure transmission with the fleet's high command. Admiral Kovac stood at the head of the virtual table, his expression grim. Next to him were intelligence officers and analysts, their faces pale. Kovacs wasted no time. "Our latest intercepts confirm that this was just the beginning. The Zaltrak's High War Council has declared a full-scale retaliation. They're mobilizing their entire fleet." The room fell into stunned silence. "How many ships are we talking about?" Hayes asked. An intelligence officer pulled up a holographic display. "Our estimates suggest a fleet 3 times the size of what we just faced. And that's just their initial wave. More forces are being assembled from their core worlds." Carter frowned. "They're throwing everything at us." Kovacs nodded. "Exactly. They no longer see this as a conquest. They see it as a threat to their survival." The implications were clear. Humanity had fought the Zaltrak's to a standstill for years, but this was different. The enemy wasn't just fighting to expand their empire anymore. They were fighting to eliminate humanity entirely. "They're calling it the Purge War," Kovacs continued. "Their goal is simple. They won't stop until every human world is reduced to ash." A heavy weight settled in Carter's chest. Humanity had won the battle, but the war had only just begun. "What are our orders?" he asked. Kovacs met his gaze. "We're not going to wait for them to strike. We're taking the fight to them." The strategy briefing continued, but Carter already knew what it meant. Humanity was done defending. They had no choice but to fight with everything they had. As the meeting ended, Carter stood at the window of the warship, staring into the vast, dark void. The enemy was coming. And this time, there would be no retreat. The war for survival had begun. The human fleet had no time to celebrate their victory. Reports flooded in from deep space surveillance. An armada of Zaltrax warships was already moving toward them. It was an overwhelming force, far larger than anything they had faced before. The enemy was not retreating. They were preparing for extermination. Captain Carter stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching as the data streamed in. His officers worked frantically, analyzing the incoming fleet. Admiral Kovacs' voice came through the comms, sharp and decisive. "They're coming in fast. We have 12 hours before they enter engagement range." Carter's mind raced. The human fleet was battered from the last battle. Supplies were low, weapons systems were damaged, and their fighters had suffered heavy losses. But they didn't have time to regroup. If they ran, the Zaltrax would chase them. If they stayed, they would be outnumbered and overwhelmed. "We need a strategy," Commander Hayes said. "A direct fight is suicide." Carter nodded. "Agreed. We need to make them bleed before they reach us." A holographic display flickered to life. A tactical map of the battlefield appeared, showing asteroid clusters, debris fields, and gravitational anomalies. Carter studied it carefully. "What if we turn the battlefield against them?" he said. "Use the environment to slow them down, force them into kill zones." Lieutenant Harris leaned forward. "You mean, set a trap?" "Exactly." Carter's mind was already working through the details. "We lure them into the asteroid field, lay mines, use debris as cover, and set up an ambush. They expect us to run or fight head-on. We do neither." Admiral Kovacs considered the plan. "It's risky, but it's the only chance we've got." The orders went out immediately. Every available engineer and crew member worked at breakneck speed. Mines were deployed, automated turrets were placed on large asteroids, and a network of false signals was created to confuse enemy sensors. The fleet repositioned itself, hiding within the debris field. Hours passed like seconds. The Zaltrax fleet arrived, their massive warships cutting through the void like silent predators. Their lead ships entered the asteroid field, unaware of the danger ahead. Then the trap was sprung. Explosions erupted as the first wave of enemy ships triggered the hidden mines. Chunks of rock and metal tore through their hulls. Automated turrets rained fire, targeting weak points with brutal efficiency. The Zaltrax formation broke apart in the chaos, their commanders scrambling to react. "Now," Carter shouted. The Resolute and the rest of the human fleet emerged from cover, striking with pinpoint accuracy. Missiles and railgun rounds tore through the enemy ranks. The Zaltrax, caught off guard, struggled to regroup. Their overwhelming numbers meant nothing in the tight confines of the battlefield. For the first time, the enemy was on the defensive. The battle raged for hours. Ship after ship fell, the debris field becoming a graveyard of Zaltrax wreckage. But the enemy was relentless. Even as their forces crumbled, they fought with desperation, refusing to retreat. Carter clenched his fists. "They're willing to die to take us with them." The Resolute shook violently as an enemy warship rammed into a nearby cruiser, detonating in a fiery explosion. The Zaltrax were resorting to suicide attacks. Kovacs' voice cut through the chaos. "We can't hold this position forever. We need an exit strategy." Carter knew he was right. The trap had worked, but if they stayed too long, they would be overwhelmed. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "We hit them hard, then we fall back." The remaining human ships launched one final devastating barrage. The Zaltrax fleet, broken and scattered, could do nothing to stop them. Then, with precise coordination, the human fleet withdrew, disappearing into the darkness of space. As the Resolute moved away from the battlefield, Carter exhaled. They had survived, but only just. Kovac's voice came through one last time. This war isn't over. But today, we reminded them, humanity does not go down without a fight. Carter looked out into the void. The enemy had underestimated them once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. But neither would humanity. This was just the beginning.